Countless sounds of wind breaking echoed throughout the heavens and earth. Far away, tens of thousands of miles beyond, countless eyes were stunned as they watched a visually overwhelming scene unfold. As the immense dimensional passage rippled with countless spatial fluctuations, numerous figures surged forth, like a swarm of locusts, spilling out of the passage. In just a few minutes, their number had surpassed 10 billion, even nearing the total population of a common continent. The sheer scale of this scene was truly breathtaking. Such a massive number. Could all the inhabitants of that dimension have arrived? The voice of astonishment spread across the surrounding heavens and earth. Whoosh! Figures, covering the sky and earth, continued to surge out from the dimensional passage. After more than 10 minutes, a particularly striking purple-gold shadow shot out, and behind it followed a vast array of figures. As they appeared, an immense dragon aura descended, enveloping everything. Dragons! As the terrifying pressure of the dragon aura spread, another wave of astonished voices echoed around. 4 dragons in the Great Thousand Worlds were known to be ranked among the divine beasts in the 10,000 Beasts record heavenly rankings. However, it was unclear which kind of dragon was appearing before them. In the Great Thousand Worlds, there were legendary dragons from lower dimensions that had reached terrifying levels. Several of these dragons had made it into the top 30 of the 10,000 Beasts record. Among these ancient dragons, there was one known as the primordial ancient dragon, which broke through the barriers of the lower dimensions and arrived in the Great Thousand Worlds a millennium ago. This dragon, after spending 100 years roaming the Great Thousand Worlds, was eventually regarded as one of the strongest beings beneath the late Earth Supreme stage. Even in the 10,000 Beasts record, it was ranked 15th. If it could reach the Heavenly Supreme level, it might even enter the top 10 of the Divine Beast rankings. However, that mighty primordial ancient dragon, with the potential to reach Heavenly Supreme, mysteriously vanished from the sight of the people of the Great Thousand Worlds, leaving no descendants. The purple gold shadow, also exuding a supreme aura, was none other than Qingji, the current Dragon Clan leader of the Wu Yuan dimension. Leading the dragon army, he entered the Great Thousand Worlds. The moment he set foot in the world, he, like the 6 great lords, felt the presence of powerful auras surrounding him. Some of these auras were stronger than his own. This Great Thousand World was indeed extraordinary, so rich in heavenly energy. This must be what they call spiritual energy, Qingji remarked. Behind him, young and talented dragons such as Lu Qing felt the thick spiritual energy of the Great Thousand Worlds, as if intoxicated by it. Doesn't it feel like we're starting anew? Yuan Qian and other dragon elders smiled as they looked at them. With our strength, we might just be ordinary here, said Yuan Qian's daughter, Yuan Qing, who was now on the brink of reaching the revolution stage. In this Great Thousand World, her power was only comparable to the late heaven transformation stage. To her surprise, she sensed no fewer than 1,000 people around her who were at least as strong as she was. Indeed, coming to the Great Thousand Worlds was like starting a new chapter. Figures continued to pour out from the dimensional passage. This overwhelming scene lasted for several tens of minutes before gradually weakening. By then, over 10 billion people from the Wu Yuan dimension had entered the Great Thousand Worlds. Such a massive population would require at least 1 or 2 continents to accommodate them. Inside the dimensional passage, Lin Xiao, accompanied by several tens of thousands of Dao sect disciples, as well as Xuanzi and many elders, flew out, followed by the Lin family members, including Lin Zhao's wife, Lu Yin. Has Lin Dong not completed that so-called dimensional baptism yet? Lin Xiao gazed toward the Wu Yuan dimension, where he could see the assimilation spirit array enveloping the entire dimension. At the heart of this array, a simple and ordinary figure remained seated. That figure was the god who protected the entire dimension. Are you Lin Dong's family? A voice suddenly came from not far away, and a figure appeared before Lin Xiao and his wife. Upon seeing the youthful appearance of the figure, Lin Xiao felt a sense of ancientness, as if the years had passed. Just the incompetent parents who benefited from Lin Dong, Lin Xiao said with a nod toward the leader of the Great Thousand Alliance. Are you waiting for Lin Dong to complete his dimensional baptism here? More than a month had passed, and the so-called dimensional baptism still hadn't been completed? Now, in that dimension, it seemed like there wasn't a trace of the heavenly energy left. Without any heavenly energy, what was Lin Dong still undergoing in terms of baptism? Not far from Lin Xiao, Lin He, Lin Yan, and Ling Qingzhu flew over as well. They looked at the seemingly 15 or 16-year-old young man in front of them and asked, "What's going on here?" "Heh, to be precise, Lin Dong's dimensional baptism hasn't even begun yet," the young man replied with a faint smile after hearing Lin He and the others' words. "What? The dimensional baptism hasn't begun?" Lin He was stunned. Hadn't Lin Dong's dimensional baptism started a month ago? And wasn't Lin Dong's strength supposed to have advanced from the peak of the 3rd grade supreme to the peak of the 7th grade supreme thanks to the baptism? Yet now, the leader of the Great Thousand Alliance was saying that Lin Dong hadn't even started the baptism? I've said before, after the dimensional baptism, this dimension will disappear, the young man continued. Do you know why the dimension will disappear? Where will it disappear to? Lin He and the others shook their heads. What the Great Thousand Alliance leader said was too profound for them to understand, and with no clues, they couldn't analyze it, so they had no answer. No matter what realm it is, its structure is energy. Even those vast mountains and rivers across the world are essentially made of energy. In a vast dimension like this, only 1/10,000th of its energy is spread throughout the air between heaven and earth, and the remaining enormous energy is highly concentrated, forming those mountains and rivers, the young man explained, looking at Lin He and the others. The heavenly energy Lin Dong absorbed earlier was merely that 1/10,000th of the dimension's energy, scattered throughout the air. If he wants to continue absorbing more, he needs the dimension embryo to break down the solidified material energy back into its original vast form. And if he doesn't absorb it, this energy will gradually flow into the Great Thousand Worlds, eventually becoming one of the countless spiritual energy particles within this great expanse. The so-called dimensional baptism is a process in which the dimension embryo helps infuse that materialized energy into the body of the dimension's controller. How much energy one can absorb and the realm one can reach depends on one's own fortune, the young man, leader of the Great Thousand Alliance, explained. Has anyone ever done something like this before? Lin He asked, his face filled with shock. The energy that could be turned into matter, how immense must it be? He continued asking, how much power would one gain if such an enormous energy were absorbed? 10,000 times? You're overestimating. The young man immediately shattered Lin He's fantasy with a dismissive smile. With his hands behind his back, seemingly recalling something, he continued, thousands of years ago, when I was the first to undergo the dimensional baptism, I was only an 8th grade supreme. But through the baptism, I directly advanced to the early Earth Supreme stage. And back then, I absorbed less than 3% of the energy from this entire dimension. Hiss. Upon hearing the words of the young man, leader of the Great Thousand Alliance, Lin He and the others inhaled sharply. Although they didn't know what the Earth's Supreme stage entailed, their instincts told them that after assimilating such spiritual energy, the young man in front of them had most certainly experienced a huge surge in strength. And yet, he had only absorbed less than 3% of the energy from the dimension. If he had absorbed it all, what terrifying level of power would that grant him? And how much heavenly energy would Lin Dong be able to absorb in his dimensional baptism? Let's just watch and see how much he can absorb. We just need to wait for the result, Lin Xiao remarked from the side. By the way, if you don't mind, feel free to settle in my Great Thousand Alliance. I'll personally set aside a continent for you, the young man suddenly said with a smile as he looked at Lin Xiao and the others, as if just remembering something. Lin Xiao was stunned. A wave of shock surged through his heart. Just who was this young man, that he could so casually offer an entire continent? Seeing the incredulous expressions on Lin Xiao and the others' faces, the young man, leader of the Great Thousand Alliance, smiled again. He then slowly turned and looked at the hundreds of billions of people from the Wu Yuan dimension surrounding them. His voice, calm but carrying immense authority, echoed through the air. Everyone, welcome to the Great Thousand Worlds. Like you, I am also from a lower dimension. Everything related to the lower dimensions is my concern. As you've already realized, depending on Lin Dong's decision, this lower dimension will soon disappear. Right now, everyone faces three choices. First, you can settle on the nearest continent. It has terrain you're familiar with, and you can live there, but as you might guess, those continents are originally part of the Great Thousand Worlds, and there are certainly many native inhabitants. Their numbers might even match or exceed yours. So, while it's called migration, it could also be seen as an invasion. And unfortunately, we, being from a lower dimension, have no authority to intervene in such matters, as per our agreement with certain super races in the Great Thousand Worlds. So, I apologize in advance. Second, we can wait for my Great Thousand Alliance to establish a massive teleportation spirit array to send you to our territory. It's not very large, but it's more than enough to provide you with several continents. However, unlike the first choice, these new continents are unfamiliar to you, so your first task will be to settle and cultivate the land. Third, the simplest option, scatter. The Great Thousand Worlds is vast and full of opportunities. While your numbers are considerable, compared to the entire Great Thousand Worlds, you're just a speck. But if you scatter, you can go anywhere you wish. The young man stood in the void, and his loud voice echoed across a vast area of hundreds of thousands of miles. The Great Thousand Alliance. It's the Great Thousand Alliance. The powerful beings who had gathered from all directions also heard the words spoken by the young man. When they heard him mention the Great Thousand Alliance, a wave of shock surged through everyone's hearts. No wonder such an imposing presence. It turned out that the mastermind behind this grand spectacle was the Great Thousand Alliance, one of the 7 super alliances of the lower dimensions in the Great Thousand Worlds. Such an existence was no weaker than the ancient races of the primordial era who had passed down their legacies for over 10,000 years. The Great Thousand Alliance was also known as the most approachable of all the lower dimension alliances. Their management and care for the lower dimensions were the best, without a doubt. Outside the massive dimensional passage, over 1 trillion figures, led by the 6 great lords and Qingji, had arrived at their first decision after entering the Great Thousand World. Above the vast, endless ocean stood an enormous dimensional passage, and in front of it gathered countless figures, numbering in the tens of billions. The sheer visual impact of such a massive assembly was astonishing. Countless gazes were fixed on the young man at the very front, and everyone fell into deep thought. 3 choices. They could either settle here, live within the territories governed by the Great Thousand Alliance, or leave and venture into the Great Thousand World on their own. I'm curious about this new world, spoke the Flame Lord after a moment of silence. Standing with his hands behind his back, he gazed at the unknown expanse before him and smiled indifferently. It seems there's nothing urgent that requires my attention at the moment. So, I think I'll take a stroll. Buzz. As soon as the Flame Lord finished speaking, his palms slowly rose, and a crimson light surged. 9 small medallions, each the size of a palm, formed from the light. Each medallion was engraved with a rising flame. Using these, it will be easier for you to find me, said the Flame Lord, tossing 5 of the 9 flame medallions to the other 5 great lords. 1 medallion was handed to Qingji, and another to Lin Diao and Lin Yan. The last one was given to Ling Qingzhu, with instructions to pass it to Lin Dong after he completed the dimensional baptism. Boom. After giving the instructions, the Flame Lord raised his fist and struck the void. The overwhelming fire energy swept outward, distorting a vast space for 1,000 meters. However, the Flame Lord's expression suddenly changed. What is going on with this space? A voice of shock rang out from the Flame Lord. He had intended to tear open a spatial rift like he had done in the Wu Yuan mainland, but he found that his full force only caused the space to twist deeply. To shatter it, his power seemed insufficient. The space in the Great Thousand World is not comparable to that of the lower dimensions. To break it, you might need to reach the 5th grade supreme stage or higher, came a calm voice from nearby. It was Ling Qingzhu, who was swiftly approaching from behind. So, what grade are we at now? Asked the Flame Lord, looking at Ling Qingzhu. He knew that she and Lin Dong were among the first to come from the Wu Yuan dimension to the Great Thousand World. Qingtan, originally from the Great Thousand World, didn't count, and Ling Qingzhu naturally knew more about the Great Thousand World than they did. 1st grade supreme. The strength of the ancestral realm is only comparable to an average supreme in the Great Thousand World. Above the supreme stage are the Earth Supreme and, further up, the Heavenly Supreme, Ling Qingzhu explained, then pointed ahead at the leader of the Great Thousand Alliance. This person before us is a true Heavenly Supreme. As Ling Qingzhu's words fell, everyone inhaled sharply. No one had expected that the young man before them had transcended 2 or 3 stages beyond the ancestral realm. The gap between the Heavenly Supreme and the Earth Supreme was vast, and even the 6 great lords in Qingzhi considered the Earth Supreme to be a distant goal. I've decided. We can't miss the opportunity to ally with such a powerful being, the Lord of Space stepped forward and said. According to Ling Qingzhu, they had only just reached the Supreme Stage, and the difference in power between the Supreme Stage and the Heavenly Supreme was far greater than the difference between the Nirvana Stage and the Reincarnation Stage. A Reincarnation Stage cultivator aligning with someone from the Nirvana Stage was similar to when Lin Dong, in the early stages of the Nirvana Stage, met Qingzhi, who was in the Reincarnation Stage, though the comparison now is on a much higher level. Forget it. Whether you align with others is your own matter. Just make sure to guard my flame medallion well. The Flame Lord sighed, smiled at the crowd one last time, and made his final farewell. With a swift motion, his figure shot off towards the distant sky. Though unable to use spatial crossing abilities, a supreme power speed in the Great Thousand Worlds was still impressive. I want to visit 2 nearby continents, as they feel somewhat familiar, said the Lord of Life and Death. I'll go with you, said the Dark Lord, stepping forward. As one of the only 2 women among the 6 great lords, the Lord of Life and Death was the closest to her, and the most familiar. Like the Flame Lord, I want to explore this new world now, said the Thunder Lord. I'll accompany my 2 senior sisters to the nearby continents, said the Lord of the Primordial Wilderness, making his choice. I'll stay for now. Once the Dragon Clan settles, I'll head to the Great Thousand Alliance. That place should offer better conditions than these nearby continents. As for the Great Thousand Worlds, we'll see later, said Qingzhi, making her decision. We'll head to the nearby continents first, and wait for Lin Dong to complete the dimensional baptism before deciding what he wants to do, said Lin Diao and the others. I agree with second brother's decision, said Lin Yin. Then, those who are heading to the nearby continents, let's depart together, Lin Mo said, looking at the massive army behind him. His voice echoed across the heavens. Whoosh! As Lin Mo finished speaking, his form expanded rapidly into a giant, heavenly demon weasel, and with 2 colossal black wings, he soared across the sky, heading towards a continent hundreds of thousands of miles away. Lin Yin and the others quickly followed. With the help of Ling Qingzhu and Qing Tan, Lin Xiao and the many Dao sect disciples formed a vast group, heading toward a distant continent. In the entire Wu Yuan dimension, the number of people following the Lord of Life and Death, the Dark Lord, the Lord of the Primordial Wilderness, and Lin Mo to the Forxian continent and the Wasteland continent reached hundreds of billions, nearly half the population of the entire dimension. Outside the dimensional passage, the leader of the Great Thousand Alliance watched the departure of hundreds of billions, but said nothing. These lower dimension people were free to go wherever they wished, and he wouldn't stop them. Well then, let's part ways, the Thunder Lord said, patting the Lord of Space on the shoulder with a smile. Then, countless bolts of lightning surged around his body, and his form transformed into a streak of thunder, racing toward the distant sky. The Thunder Lord and the Flame Lord were heading to the Great Thousand Worlds out of curiosity and passion, though neither of them anticipated that they would soon be summoned by the Lord of Life and Death, setting them on a new journey. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. As the Thunder Lord left, countless figures began to stir. Soon, a vast swarm of shadows surged like a black tide, spreading in all directions, with no fixed destination. However, their number was only in the tens of thousands, all at least at the 3rd heaven stage. These were the aspirants of the Wu Yuan dimension, individuals who had fought hard, seldom relying on the resources of the major sects, aiming to one day stand out. Now, the Great Thousand Worlds was their new stage, and they were about to begin a new journey. Over the vast seas, only a few 100 billion figures remained, led by the Lord of Space, all choosing to join the Great Thousand Alliance. A new world, a new beginning. Perhaps many years later, these scattered individuals would reunite, but they would be different from before. Some would be extraordinary, while others would be erased by the wheel of history. Everything diverged here. This was a super heavenly realm located in the northwest of the Great Thousand Worlds, the Great Heaven Realm. The Great Heaven Realm was an enormous region encompassing nearly 100,000 continents. Its territorial layout consisted of the 4 outer heavenly realms and the Central Heaven Realm at its core. Among them, the Central Heaven Realm was the most vast of all within the Great Heaven Realm. Tens of thousands of continents stood in this realm, where countless forces clashed for dominance. Even a heavenly supreme couldn't hope to unify it. The Central Heaven continent is the largest landmass in the Central Heaven Realm. Here, various sects and factions are as numerous as the stars. Each faction is typically protected by at least one supreme powerhouse, and to stand out among them, it is necessary to have at least one Earth Supreme strong enough to hold their ground. However, to reach the pinnacle of power, a faction must have a heavenly supreme-level expert at its helm. The 5 most prominent superpowers in the Central Heaven continent are known as 1 sect, 1 hall, and 3 palaces. The 1 sect refers to the ancient Heaven Gate, a major force in the Central Heaven Realm. The 1 hall is the primordial divine hall, another powerful force. The 3 palaces are 3 equally balanced factions, each a dominant power in its own right. The Divine Void Palace, the Taiching Palace, and the Grand Myriad Heavenly Palace. These 5 superpowers each control a different direction of the Central Heaven continent, and it is rumored that each of them is even protected by a true heavenly supreme powerhouse. At this moment, in a remote part of the Central Heaven Realm, there lies an abandoned mountain range. The shattered ruins of ancient temples scattered across the mountains suggest that this once may have been the stronghold of a powerful faction. For reasons unknown, this faction either moved away or was wiped out by another force. As new factions rise, old ones inevitably fall, a law that remains unchanged across the Central Heaven continent. Buzz. In a particular area of the desolate mountains, a distortion in space revealed 6 figures. Among them were 2 young men and 3 middle-aged men. The leader was an elderly man dressed in white, radiating an overwhelming aura that suggested he was a true heavenly supreme. Behind him were 2 youths, Xiao Yin and He Yuanyun. The other 3 men were all Earth Supreme experts, not weaker than He Yuanyun. A year ago, after breaking free from the constraints of the dimensional barrier, Xiao Yin and his companions, including Kai Lin, were scattered across the Great Thousand Worlds due to dimensional turbulence. Xiao Yin, feeling responsible for gathering them back, had learned of Kai Lin's whereabouts after meeting He Yuanyun, who had previously saved her. However, He Yuanyun did not bring good news. Kai Lin, upon arriving in the Central Heaven Realm, had infiltrated one of the 3 palaces, the Divine Void Palace, to find Xiao Yin. Using unknown methods, she had stolen a powerful artifact, the Boundless Mirror, from the Divine Void Palace. As a result, she became the target of a manhunt by the Divine Void Palace. Fortunately, He Yuanyun was close to Kai Lin, and the experts sent by the Divine Void Palace had failed to capture her. But when the Divine Void Palace sent 2 Earth Supreme experts to pursue her, He Yuanyun could only watch as Kai Lin was taken away. After barely escaping, He Yuanyun sought out Xiao Yin, who was fortunate enough to be found by He Yuanyun. In an effort to help, the Lord of the Western Heaven Palace, Shui Yuan, agreed to assist Xiao Yin by offering him 3 Earth Supreme experts and 1 Heavenly Supreme expert as support. As He Yuanyun observed Xiao Yan's support, he couldn't help but feel a twitch in his face. It seemed that the forces from the lower dimensions, united by the threat of the extraterritorial evil clan, had become increasingly united. Without support from the Great Thousand Worlds, these factions had no chance unless they banded together. This is the main region of the Central Heaven Realm, the Central Heaven continent, right? Xiao Yin looked out at the vast land before him. Though he could not fully grasp its scale visually, his instincts told him that this continent was easily dozens, if not hundreds, of times larger than the Luo God continent of the Western Heaven Realm. The Divine Void Palace is one of the 5 peak forces on this continent, and its strength is comparable to that of the Luo God clan at its height, the elderly man in white said, standing with his hands behind his back. He was the Grand Elder of the Western Heaven Palace. His gaze shifted to a distant part of the continent, where the Divine Void Palace was located. I don't care about their so-called top-tier status. Anyone who dares touch my woman will have to face the consequences. Xiao Yan clenched his fist. His voice, filled with cold determination, echoed as he stared into the distant horizon. His goal in becoming strong was to protect his family and friends. Several hundred years ago, when I broke through the dimensional shackles, I arrived in the central heaven realm. There is also someone here with whom I share a history, that old man. He must have become a heavenly supreme by now. The white-robed elder gazed at the distant horizon and said lightly, "Hundreds of years ago, after breaking through the dimensional shackles, he arrived in the Great Thousand Worlds. The place he arrived at was the Central Heaven continent. At that time, after completing his spiritual energy assimilation, his strength was only at the first grade supreme stage. In this Central Heaven continent, where heavenly supremes were as numerous as the stars, he endured great humiliation. Those who broke through the shackles of the lower dimension, like him, were usually highly gifted. Within a few decades, he advanced to the Earth's supreme stage. However, he offended a young clan leader of a powerful faction on this continent. That led to a great battle, forcing him to leave this supercontinent. After that, he hadn't returned for hundreds of years. So, Senior, you must know something about this place?" Xiao Yan asked the white-robed elder. "The first few decades after I arrived in the Great Thousand Worlds were spent here. But now, hundreds of years have passed. With the elimination rules of the Central Heaven Realm, I'm afraid this Central Heaven Realm is not the same as it was hundreds of years ago. However, the 5 great overlords don't seem to have changed much," the white-robed elder replied. "Senior, you mentioned offending a faction here hundreds of years ago?" Xiao Yan asked, confused. Hundreds of years ago, I obtained a super artifact. Unfortunately, at that time, the young master of the ancient Heaven Gate had his eyes on the artifact in my hands. To seize it, he sent 3 Earth Supreme experts from the ancient Heaven Gate. In that battle, I severely injured 2 of their Earth Supremes. Though I was badly wounded, I still managed to escape, the white-robed elder said. Ancient Heaven Gate? Hearing this, He Yuan was shocked. The ancient Heaven Gate was one of the 5 great overlord factions of the Central Heaven Realm, and its power was not weaker than that of the Divine Void Palace. Does this mean that this time, not only do we have to deal with the Divine Void Palace and rescue Kailin, but we also have to guard against the ancient Heaven Gate? Moreover, the young master of the ancient Heaven Gate, whom the elder mentioned, is probably now the true leader of the faction. If they send experts, they would definitely be at the Heavenly Supreme level. In that case, rescuing Kailin from the hands of the Divine Void Palace won't be easy at all. Don't worry. Interestingly, although I offended the ancient Heaven Gate back then, I also saved the daughter of the palace master of another overlord faction, the white-robed elder said, smiling when he noticed He Yuan's concerned expression. He then turned his gaze to another part of the horizon. Xia Tianqing of the Grand Myriad Heavenly Palace. Hundreds of years have passed, and she must have become the palace master by now. Senior, are you saying? Xiao Yan's eyes lit up as he understood the possibility. Let's go. Before confronting the Divine Void Palace, let's first visit the Grand Myriad Heavenly Palace, the white-robed elder said with a calm smile. He waved his sleeve, and a spatial rift appeared, forming a passage. My arrival has likely been noticed by the ancient Heaven Gate. The Grand Myriad Heavenly Palace is still several billion miles away. Let's depart directly now, the white-robed elder said with a light smile and stepped into the spatial passage, disappearing from sight. Behind him, Xiao Yan and the others exchanged glances, then, without further hesitation, moved swiftly into the spatial passage. As they entered, the passage began to shrink and eventually vanished. Meanwhile, far across the continent, several billion miles away, at the other end of the land, there was an endless region, where countless mountain ranges intertwined. Towering sky-piercing peaks pierced through the clouds. On these mountains that broke through the clouds, stood massive palaces. Tens of thousands of grand palaces stood above the sea of clouds, reaching up to the heavens and connecting to the earth below. This was the true heaven and earth palace, known as the ancient heaven palace due to its countless millennia of history. Among these grand palaces, at the very end of the cloud sea, stood the largest of all, a grand purple-golden palace, shining with a dazzling light that seemed as bright as the sun in the sky. This grand purple-golden palace was called the ancient heavenly divine palace. As the core palace of the ancient heaven palace, there was a single reason for its importance. Inside the ancient heavenly divine palace was an endless space that had been opened up. At this moment, deep within the boundless expanse, there lay a vast, endless sea of lush green hills and forests. In the heart of this lush landscape, there was an immense lake with a diameter of 10,000 miles. In the middle of this lake, a small island, no more than 100 miles across, emerged. The island was teeming with life, covered in countless towering trees. One particularly massive green tree stood out prominently on the island. Perched upon this tree, in a meditative posture, was a figure in yellow robes. The figure was a middle-aged man with striking black and white hair. His features were simple and unassuming, yet there was an undeniable aura of power that radiated from him in waves, signaling to all that this humble-looking man in yellow robes was, in fact, a true heavenly supreme. Suddenly, despite having been in deep meditation with his eyes closed, the man seemed to sense something. His tightly shut eyes slowly opened, and a hoarse voice escaped his lips. "Wu Wanlong, after all these years, you have returned to the central heaven continent.